It's almost Christmas.
It is. It is upon us.
Today is Tuesday, so you got Wednesday, Thursday, Friday.
You trying to make us all anxious or what?
Oh, I mean, we've already been made anxious for the last month and a half. It's almost like the whole season's over because we had so much going on.
You get to this point and it comes so quickly, and then all of a sudden it's the day after, isn't it?
Well, we got 3 more days.
I know. Have you finished your shopping?
Are you kidding? Of course I haven't.
You're the last minute guy, aren't you? You go out.
Those sweet ladies say, I'm going to something with my wife, but you have a little something here. It's Christmas Eve. Hey, can you wrap it for me?
Yeah. And could you give it to her?
Okay. Well, so much for the holidays, but there's a more serious thing. One of the oldest Christian populations in the world are the Assyrians, who have lived in the Baghdad area in Iraq. Iraq used to be Mesopotamia for years, for decades, long before there were any Muslims who came in. But now they're joining forces in the face of terrible persecution. They've recently suffered some of the deadliest attacks on their community since 2003.
Well, they've taken a bold step to gain security, calling on their government to give them a safe haven. George Thomas explains.
This is the Nineveh Plains. Assyrian Christians who trace their roots to the time of Noah have historically claimed this area as home. Now, Iraqis are calling for this place to be officially declared a Christian province.
We have 500,000 Christian refugees in the neighboring countries. And so our position has been very clear to the government. These people will not come home until they have a place to go to.
Ken Joseph is with the Assyrian Alliance. He and leaders of 16 other Iraqi Christian organizations recently met to talk about forming a Christian province. Joseph says just getting the different groups to agree on something as historic as this was nothing short of a miracle.
They put away all their arguments and they got together and did it.
Iraqi Christians have in recent weeks been prime targets of Muslim extremists. The biggest attack came October 31st when members of an al-Qaeda group attacked a church in Baghdad, leaving 68 people dead. Iraqi believers are now wondering whether it's time to leave their homeland despite calls to stay.
We're addressing you, our dear sons, in these difficult days, appealing to you to be constant in your faith and love to the soil of this homeland, Iraq.
As the violence against Christians escalates, hundreds of Christian families began fleeing to the Kurdistan region of northern Iraq.
It's the best of times and the worst of times. It's the best of times because for the first time people have freedom. They can do things they've never been able to do before. The church can do things they never were able to do before. But it's also the worst of times because you have forces that are desperate to keep this success from ever accomplishing its goals.
Since the October attack, several more people have lost their lives, including a Christian shopkeeper who was shot in the city of Mosul.
And as the violence here in Mosul increased, Christians have become more open to this idea of an autonomous region, an area where they can not only practice their faith, but live in freedom.
It's run by Christians, have our own flag, our own government, our own security force.
Joseph and others hope a new province will persuade Iraqi Christians to come back and help rebuild their homeland. George Thomas, CBN News.
Thanks, George. A good friend owns a very popular restaurant in Virginia Beach. He's an Iraqi, and he told me a couple of weeks ago that 4 of his cousins were in that church and were murdered, 4 of them. And he said, these people have done nothing wrong, they don't incite any violence, but then they've been there forever, for centuries. Don't ever, ever, ever believe Islam is a religion of peace. It's not. Wendy?
Pat, America's shoppers are spending more this Christmas than even the country's retailers had hoped for. The National Retail Federation had been predicting a 2.3% increase, but now they think it will be a full point higher.
This is going to be one of the highest volume retail periods in the history of mankind. And every day from now until Christmas will be massive.
What happens in the next several days will make a big difference. Industry analysts say the last 10 days before Christmas can account for a third of all holiday sales because a lot of people are like Pat and wait to the last minute.
Oh, they're not. You mean, Wendy, surely you've already bought all your Christmas presents right after Thanksgiving. Maybe that Black Friday you shopped.
No, I'm like you, Pat. Sorry.
Okay, I'm with you. Well, anyhow, it's amazing that the economy, 1/4 of the retail sales is during Christmas. Christmas is a big deal here, and it's become a big deal in Japan, a big deal in where else? Hong Kong,
well,
China.
It's surprising that the numbers are up like they are in spending this year.
Well, people are ready for a blowout. The economy's not all that good, but there's kind of pent-up demand, and it's exploding. Okay, Wendy, what's next?
Well, Pat, winter is officially here, in case you haven't noticed. And in some places across the U.S., it roared in with a vengeance. California is experiencing what some call the storm of the decade. And in Colorado, forecasters are predicting epic snowfall. As John Jessup reports, the storm is moving east.
From East Coast to West Coast, the winter weather is making its presence known. Perpetual pounding rain is soaking what's usually sunny Southern California.
I think we got enough for 3 years now.
I don't want to hear anything about a drought anymore.
In Kern County, 3 days of rain were enough for this guy to ride on his jet ski. For others, the flooding was a more serious matter, forcing hundreds of residents out of their homes and into shelters.
We just did it quick. We had to be quick to get all the things together and pack the car, pack some food, water.
The downpour, as much as 10 inches in some places, has been causing problems with trees. This man was inside when he heard what he describes as snapping and cracking sounds from an old pine tree next to his home.
I just knew it, and I knew my truck was parked there, and I was like, oh, this is going to be a bad day.
And shoppers in Sacramento were in for a shock when high winds caused the wall of this shopping mall to cave in. This storm system won't let up until later this week and could bring up to 10 more inches of rain before the next storm rolls in Christmas night.
It's nice to finally have winter in California.
In Colorado, a winter storm brought 80-mile-per-hour winds that battered Colorado Springs and caused traffic nightmares. Forecasters are predicting up to a foot of snow there. And it's an early white Christmas for the country's midsection and parts of the East Coast. In Cape Cod, Massachusetts, those who weren't involved in accidents.
I was just driving down Main Street. A couple people tried to turn in front of them. Bad road conditions. Couldn't stop.
Tried to take it all in stride.
Having a great time?
A good thing because it's only the first day of what could be a very long winter. John Jessup, CBN News.
Oh, I know it's hard on the travelers, but bring on the snow to the East Coast, Pat.
I'm for it. You know, they've been worrying about in the West Coast about a water shortage, and there's a serious water shortage. So this ought to fill up the reservoirs and that big snowpack up in the Sierras, and it'll be.
Have to hope for no mudslides in the
process.
process.
Well, they'll
right?
have some of them, but at least they'll be able to plant their crops and have irrigation, which is very important. If all that water doesn't run off, you hope it doesn't. We have a serious drought in the southeast, so maybe some of it will come out here. Wendy?
Pat, the FCC is pushing ahead with new rules that critics say could drastically change the way Americans use the Internet. The so-called network neutrality rules give the government new control over the web. They could also let web providers block access to certain services and applications. Public interest groups say that's not fair.
Net neutrality is, in reality, socialism for the Internet. Everybody gets equal amounts of nothing. What they're trying to say is they're trying to tell the internet service providers that they cannot manage their networks. It's almost it's for all intents and purposes a Fifth Amendment takings violation. It's telling these people who have spent hundreds of billions of dollars building their infrastructure, who have managed the networks thus far and turned it into a free speech, free market Xanadu, that all of a sudden they need to be regulated, they need to be shut down, and that they can't manage the network in the way that they've done so incredibly successfully over the last decade plus.
And Christian broadcasters are concerned this could lead to restrictions on their ability to freely proclaim the gospel on the Internet. Well, there are more questions than answers about how the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell will be implemented. Now that Congress has ended the ban on gays serving openly in the military, it's up to the Pentagon to work out details. And it could take months to integrate homosexuals into the military. Conservative Christians are worried about the impact it will have on military chaplains. For more, we spoke with retired Army chaplain Brigadier General Douglas Lee.
In the short term, chaplains will
continue to take care of troops no matter who they are, as well as they've done in the past, present, and will in the future. And so my concern is not so much will chaplains be available to take care of anybody who comes their way, but the threat is a longer term, probably, in which the opportunity for chaplains or faith groups, not just Christian chaplains, chaplains from faith groups that believe homosexuality is a sin will be threatened.
And for the entire interview with Chaplain Lee, go to our website, cbnnews.com. Well, in an era when religious differences lead to war, terror attacks, and persecution, Americans stand out as a people who are remarkably tolerant of each other's religions. As Paul Strand reports, new studies have found out some of the reasons.
How can America be a country that is religiously devout, religiously diverse, but also religiously tolerant?
That's what David Campbell and his co-author of American Grace sought to find out in doing two of the largest polls ever of religious believers. He said at a Pew Forum event in Washington, those studies show Americans are the most devout believers of any industrialized nation in the world, and even slightly more devout than Iran, home to some of the world's most radical Muslims. But compared to other countries as devout as the U.S., there's virtually no serious religious bigotry or persecution here. Campbell says it has much to do with how Americans of so many faiths freely intermingle.
Americans over the last generation or so have come to connect with one another across religious lines, such that our data show pretty clearly that almost every American has within their close circle of friends, often within their family, often within their very household, someone of another faith, which in turn breeds an acceptance of other faiths because these are the people you love. It's really hard to demonize someone, even if they're of another faith, when there's someone who's close to you.
Half of Americans now marry someone of another faith. 1/3 have changed religions. And it turns out more than 80% don't believe their religion is the only path to heaven.
Even when you push them and say, well, does that include, if they're Christian, faiths that are not Christian? It still turns out that a high percentage, overwhelming majorities of Americans say, yes, actually people of other faiths can go to heaven.
This leads to a carefree live and let live attitude. Of all religions, the research shows Americans are most negative towards Muslims. But right up there are Buddhists and Mormons. Campbell suggests that's because most Americans aren't linked to Muslims, Buddhists, or Mormons. Again, proving the point that intermingling tends to breed tolerance, at least in America. Paul Strand, CBN News, Washington.
And wouldn't you say the heart of Christianity is love, Pat? And since America is mostly Christian, that's where the tolerance comes from, right?
That's exactly right. And the freedoms people have enjoyed, Wendy, have come from the Christian society. We have had a Judeo-Christian society. That's what America is. And Christians are very tolerant. They do believe that Jesus is the only way to salvation, but at the same time, they're not particularly judgmental, as the media would like to portray. They're very forgiving because they look for forgiveness themselves.
The new 2010 census could spell gains for Republicans. Results from the Census Bureau show America's population is steadily migrating south and west. That translates into more congressional seats being moved to GOP-leaning states like Texas. The once-a-decade population count is used to redraw election maps, which will be used in 2012. The count also found U.S. population growth to be the lowest in 7 decades. President Obama is gaining support for his major arms control treaty with Russia. Backers of the START treaty say they have the votes for Senate approval after Republican Scott Brown said he'll vote for it. But many Republicans are still reluctant. Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell says the new treaty is flawed. He believes it would limit the United States' ability to protect itself from ballistic missile attacks. Well, you can always get the latest from CBN News by going to our website at cbnnews.com.